The agenda this week assessed protections for zoo animals in Ontario, asked how to grow cities with charm, considered whether your generation shapes your media diet, and spoke to author Twenge about the differences among those generations. The agenda's Week in Review begins with Ontario's craft brewing industry.
Okay, JSJ, give me your take on how level the playing field is.
In terms of level, you're not going to find somebody, with a bubble that's going to sit in the middle. It's if you're trying to use a tool for that, it's not going to work. The beer store is a great idea, or at least it was in 1927 when it was a co-op. It's structured as a co-op, and this means that they don't have any capital. What it is a great reducer of complexity. And one of the problems that we're talking about here is the problem of market complexity. You've got all these brands, you want to get them to the consumer. At the time, when it was developed, you didn't have this number of brands. You had, 30 breweries across Ontario in 1930. And then by, 1990, you've got 3 or something like that. It's Molson, Labatt, and Sleeman. And it becomes really difficult once you've got so many different varieties, this trend towards innovation that Mandy's talking about, it becomes really difficult to represent that product across the province. But for Molson and Labatt, who have a smaller number of brands, the beer store is really effective because it allows them to share delivery costs. They're not really operating, and the monopoly question is kind of out the window at this point. They're operating together in order to deliver beer across the province. That's what the beer store is, and they own that distribution.
Okay, Mandy, let me come back at you for sort of finish up this line of questioning here, and that is, there is this so-called master agreement between the Government of Ontario and the beer store, the 3 companies that run the beer store, and that expires in 2 years. If you were able to oversee the transition in a way where something would emerge that would be more friendly to your industry, what would you like to see happen?
I think many other small brewers would like to see the ability, firstly, for brewers to open more of their own retail stores. And so creating that experience where you come in and you look in the tanks and you talk to someone who's knowledgeable about the beer and you can taste the thing that was just packaged this morning, that's really unique to craft beer.
And you can't do that now?
No, so craft brewers are limited to 2 retail stores in the province. Each retail store is required to have an operating brewery. And of course, the investment in stainless steel tanks and all of the machinery required to build a brewery, packaging equipment, that's really cost prohibitive for us to be building multiple breweries. We're limited to 2.
How many do you have?
I have 1, but hopefully by the end of the year I'll have 2. That's the goal. And
but
so,
if you could have, if you didn't have to have brew making capacity at every location, how many locations do you dream of having?
Multiple. I could see having them in different areas of the city. We'd also like to see the ability to cross-sell each other's beer. So imagine a world where craft brewers could start a cooperative like the beer store. We could sell each other's products. We're really passionate about craft beer. We can promote breweries that have similar values to our own. The opportunities would really be endless in a world where craft brewers were granted the same rights that the foreign multinationals have today.
Got it. Okay, we're down to our last few minutes here, and let's just let's finish up on this. I guess it was about 10, 20 years ago, Jordan, the craft brewing industry was all the rage across the province, right? There were tons of people getting into it, and it looked like there was lots of money being made, and it was certainly the shiny new thing on the shelf. Okay, that was then. What's the level of hype around it today, in your view?
I would say that the level of hype is diminished to some extent. The difficulty being that people are a little bit overwhelmed. You're also facing a demographic challenge in the sense that the boomer generation is aging. They're the people who used to buy 2 fours of beer on the weekends. 1977 is the high point for that, by the way. It's been steadily decreasing since then. So you've got that issue. But you've also got people who's just spent 3 years after turning legal to drink, not being able to go to pubs. So there's a socialization element in there as well. It becomes a little bit difficult to get people to buy in. If you can imagine walking into the LCBO for your first time as a 19-year-old and seeing this amount of variety, well, maybe it's a panoply of wonderful choices, and maybe it's just a little overwhelming. There might be a reason why they're just going for the thing that's cranberry flavored in the seltzer aisle. Being able to tell the story is really important, and I think more locations for bottle shops for breweries would help with that.
Okay, Steve, let me try from this angle here. We've heard about the challenges you guys have in terms of how many locations you're allowed to have. Taxation policy is a problem. You feel there's an uneven playing field as it relates to distribution. How much is the industry itself, though, to blame for whatever problems it is having right now, in your view?
Oh, it's hard to blame an industry, right? Because it's not like we did this to ourselves. It happened. I think you put a lot of enthusiasm into any market, and it's going to expand. And there was so much enthusiasm for craft beer for so long that it expanded really fast. But again, those of us that have been in the industry long enough remember that this isn't the first time that craft beer had a downturn. Back in '95, everyone was claiming craft beer was dead, and it came back with a vengeance. I feel like it'll come back again. We just have to kind of be okay with the fact that we're not the only thing in beverage alcohol that people are talking about today. But we're still an important part of the industry, and I think craft beer has a bright future ahead of it still.
Graham, if you could make one change to the way things work right now, what would you do?
I really agreed with the ability to cross-sell with other and collaborate with other small producers and small breweries across the province would be a big change and game changer for us, particularly in the north, because of existing distribution challenges we have now.
Okay. Mandy, how about you? One big change that you think would really improve things?
It's really tough for me to make a pick between tax reform, like I talked about some of those tax challenges earlier, and giving craft beer fans access to more craft beer through more craft beer purchase locations. If I had to choose one over the other, I think really for the sustainability of the industry, we really need to see some major changes on the tax side for small brewers, and make sure that our pace of tax growth is not many multiples larger than that of the large brewers.
JSJ, what say you?
Well, for me, I think that one of the things that's going to happen is if you open up more grocery stores after the MFA is renegotiated or possibly scrapped entirely.
This is the master frame agreement?
That's right. They're currently at 450 grocery stores. They topped out 6 years into the agreement. You could expand that easily. And in fact, the LCBO has been expanding into more convenience outlets, about 130 over the last year. Nobody seems to mention that part. We already are having convenience store sales. It's just not the way you want it to be. So more shelf space will definitely help. But if we had more independent retailers who were able to sell craft beer without the decision-making process that goes into a large chain like Loblaws or a Sobeys, something like that, you might end up with better results.
Gotcha.
There's definitely a spectrum of zoos out there, with the Toronto Zoo being, one of our top zoos in Canada, there's a variety of different places. But roadside zoos are typically those hobby zoo that is on the side of a highway, which is why they're called roadside zoos in a rural town, with people who don't have expertise or any training in how to take care of these animals, versus a more established, professionally accredited zoo, which has training and staff and a business plan, and our other guest, Dolph, will tell you more.
All right. Well, Kendra, I'm hoping you give us a sense here. Do we know how many roadside zoos are in Ontario? Do we have a figure on that?
I certainly know we have the most in the country. What's the specific number? I think it fluctuates a little bit, depending on,
40, 50, something like that, I would say. Yeah. It's our estimate.
All right. Kendra, one of the things I had mentioned a few animals off the top, and I think when people think of roadside zoos, one of the things we think about is big cats. And I'm curious, do we know how many big cats there are in the province right now?
It's extremely hard to track. Organizations like World Animal Protection have done their best to try to establish some firm numbers. It's probably higher even than we think. It's precisely as Melissa said, this is really unregulated. It could be talking about someone having some in their backyard or on their property, and then of course we get into the private zoos. So getting a firm number is tough. What ballpark-wise?
Hundreds of big cats, lions, tigers, jaguars. But again, as Kendra said, there's no public reporting of this, which is a serious problem for whether it's an emergency responder or a municipal bylaw enforcement officer, not knowing what they're going to come across on someone's property.
Oh, all right. Kendra, I want to ask you, a lot of people might be surprised that there are lions, jaguars, tigers in this province right now amongst us. I'm curious, what specific animals are banned in Ontario? Are there animals that are banned?
It's interesting. In Ontario, it's actually only illegal to have two kinds of animals, pit bulls or orcas. So in contrast to a province like British Columbia, for example, which has pages of animals that have been deemed not appropriate for people to keep or private businesses to keep because we're not able to offer anywhere near the level of even basic welfare standards for them. Ontario is a bit of a Wild West, pardon the pun,
right.
When it comes to which animals are allowed here. And most of it is left to municipalities. Some research assistants and I actually dug into the numbers across all of Ontario's 444 municipalities, and a full half of them didn't have any regulations governing the keeping of wild animals. So that's huge areas of the province. Obviously an area where we could do with some provincial leadership.
All right, we'll get into that. I want to bring Dolph into the conversation. Dolph, of course, you're at the helm of a publicly funded zoo, the Toronto Zoo. There's another component to what your organization does that I think the public maybe not aware of. Talk to us a little bit about the Saving Species Sanctuary. What is it exactly?
Yeah, this is an important addition that came through our master planning process a year ago. And, as we went out to the public, we talked about our mission of connecting people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. One of the things they're looking for good accredited zoos to do is be a home for those animals that could be in harm's way. And kicking off the show with the number of lions, tigers, when we get into large reptiles, venomous snakes, it is really troubling that there's so many of these animals out there. We're not sure where they are, and we have such limited capacity to care for them if they are abandoned or in a scenario where that passionate person passes away or who knows what. So we added this to our master plan in response to public feedback and to address the gap that really clearly exists here of not knowing what's out there and what happens to it if they end up in harm's way.
All right, Kendra, I'm going to come to you. Recently, Melissa's organization, World Animal Protection, asked Ontarians to not visit private roadside zoos. I just want to get your take. Do you agree on that strategy?
Yes. If you want entertainment, you go see the film Blackberry. If you want to learn about animals, which I think a lot of people do, you read books, you watch documentaries. Perhaps you volunteer at your local humane society or for your local wildlife rehabilitator. Right? Roadside zoos, I think people frequent them for a range of different reasons. Sometimes I think there is that genuine curiosity and interest in animals that comes from a very laudable place, a good place. But sometimes I think most of us would agree that it's just the novelty or the entertainment factor. And the reality is that we need to move away from this idea of thinking of animals as objects to be put on display. Objects that we can be making money from, or the people who run these organizations can be making money from.
All right, Melissa, let's talk Queen's Park. What is Queen's Park not doing about roadside zoos that you would like them to do?
We would like to see them set up a comprehensive, proactive licensing system so that if you want to have a zoo, you need to have the professional expertise and qualifications in order to care for those animals, that you have a business plan, an emergency plan, that you have the proper resources. Because right now, we have some standards, but it's a Band-Aid. We're seeing charges being laid and then, courts are being backlogged, so we don't even know if there's a success for a conviction. We've seen that with Marineland a few times. And there's nothing to curb this problem. We have more roadside zoos than any other jurisdiction in Canada, so it's a massive animal welfare problem and public safety problem. So we need a proactive system of licensing, and really, if those zoos can't keep their animals to a professional standard, they should be closed down in a pragmatic way.
Now, is this a little bit different than, we do have some standards. There's the Ontario Standard for Care, which is, food, shelter, water. Are we asking to double down on that, or is this something completely different?
I think the standards that exist could be strengthened. We were at the advisory table providing input in those standards. That was back, they were adopted, I think, in 2008, 2009. So it wasn't everything we asked for, but it's something. But it's also about enforcement. So we released a report last September reviewing 11 zoos in Ontario. All of those zoos had issues where there was potential violations of existing standards. So even those minimum standards are being violated.
Mary, start us with this. Can you define what the charm or character of a city is?
No, you really can't. And I just want to make sure right off the top that we talk honestly about that, because charm is in the eye of the beholder. And I always worry, and I'm sure that my esteemed colleague to my left and I are going to have an animated conversation about this, because there are lots of parts of cities that locals would probably not use the term charm, but they would say it's theirs. It reflects who they are. It's come up as a result of whatever needs and aspirations they had. And so it has a kind of local charm. But what I want us to do is be careful to not sound condescending and judgmental. That's charming, that isn't. It's really got to be about authenticity and resonance with the local community. And, and I think you can do that.
Okay, Mr. Condescending and judgmental, let's hear from you on this. I don't know if that was meant for him.
I handed it right over to you.
Yeah, you kind of did.
It's
kinda
true.
did.
What can I say?
What do you feel you can define the charm or character of a city when you see it?
Well, I know if I feel the city is charming or not. And to be honest with you, Steve, I've never thought charm is Toronto's long suit. I mean, we have charming areas, they're charming neighborhoods. Cabbagetown is charming. The area around Roncesvalles is very charming. Yonge and Eglinton, this area that we're in right now, where I grew up, is very uncharming. But
12 years of LRT construction will do that to you.
You know, I think that Yonge and Eglinton is now the sort of metaphor for the whole city. It's a city of constant construction. It's like 1984. Instead of constant war, it's constant construction. These pretentious, over-designed condo towers, and behind it, acres and acres of low-rise, two-story, post-war housing that somehow manages to survive despite it all. But charming is not a word I would use to describe Toronto. It's livable, and we like it, and we're all here. But charming, no.
Well, he gave a couple of examples of neighborhoods in the city that he thinks are charming. Do you want to add to that? When you see charm, what do you think of in this city?
Again, I think it depends on what people are looking for. You know, for me, part of what makes a city really interesting is uniqueness. So, and sometimes I would call that, in my case, I like grit. I like neighborhoods that have mixed use, different kinds of forms, different kinds of design that's been put into there, not in a quite so tidy and thoughtful a way. Sometimes I worry, Chris, with charm, that we're talking about a postcard-like, you know, kind of emblematic, this is a perfect city, versus you and I know, Toronto has all sorts of neighborhoods that are interesting, lots of surprises, and unique to those neighborhoods. And so whether maybe charm is just too sentimental a word, I'm trying to find a word that's more descriptive of forward-thinking, responsive to what people want.
You know, if we go to Paris, let's say, people would say Paris is a charming city. It's more than charming, perhaps it's harmonious. There are very strict rules about how tall a building can be, the materials that they have to be included in the building, that sort of thing, the uses even of the floors. And it adds up to a sense of harmony and sort of, you feel comfortable there because you know.
But they also have a lot of French people speaking French, which adds to the charm, right?
Well, can I counter this and just say, let's take another city if we're going to do that, Washington, D.C. Lots of harmony in terms of the public buildings. But the really interesting parts of Washington, D.C., as you and I know, are the neighborhoods that have sparked up and are completely idiosyncratic and not sort of charming, but really interesting.
But you know, I guess the thing is that cities have their public areas and their sort of private areas. And when we think about Toronto, we don't think about the neighborhood that I live in or necessarily Cabbagetown, those kinds of places that I mentioned, even though it's charming. We think about what's happening at King and Yonge. We think about what's happening on Bloor Street. We think about, you know, where the baseball stadium is. Those parts of the city that belong to everybody, not necessarily just the people who own or who live in houses.
Okay, follow up on that then. When you think about what's happening at Yonge and King or at Yonge and Egg or near the Sky Dome or whatever, Rogers Center, whatever, when you think about that, what are you thinking about or referring to?
You know, you just touched on one of the points I want to make, which is I believe that the city is under such pressure to change. The pace of change is so fast that nobody, I should say not nobody, but we feel an increasing sense of alienation. We feel untethered. And when you just mentioned Sky Dome, the names of public buildings is another example of that. It started as Sky Dome, then it became something else, and now it's Rogers Center. The O'Keefe Center became Hummingbird, and I don't even know what it is right now. Everything is up for sale. Everything is up for grabs. You know, they're going to move Ontario Place now. They're going to, you know...
Even the Leafs don't play in Maple Leaf Gardens anymore.
Exactly.
Or in a place named Maple Leaf
It's
something.
a supermarket.
I know, we sound like a couple of fogies here. Sue-Ann, how have your media habits changed since it started?
Well, we still get one newspaper, I won't say which one. I get two others, two Americans, plus The Guardian online. I read way more online than I used to. And also, I find that TV news is a bit slow for me with the set format. So more and more I'm getting that online too, so that I can skip some stories.
Huh, so you don't actually watch very much news on television anymore?
It's on all the time. My husband is addicted, but I'm finding it a slow and inefficient way of getting news. Current affairs is different, but not news.
Interesting. Okay. How have your media habits changed with time?
Yeah, I think starting off more with reading the newspaper and then gradually moving into the internet. So even with the internet, it's using more so news websites and then a combination of various social media to get my information.
Do you get a newspaper delivered to your home?
No, I don't.
No kidding. It was a facetious question in a way. Yeah. Paolo, how about you?
Well, I completed that transition of my generation from legacy media to digital media. So nowadays I do rely on social media, and I do look at the news and TV with the, let's say, the professor perspective, so to really look at what's going on in the legacy media. But my media diet is more closer now to the generation of my students.
Do you get a newspaper delivered to your home?
I used to when I was a child.
I used to when I was a child.
With my family.
Fabulous. Okay. Hazel, how about you?
I have tried to avoid getting most of my news from social media, even though it is so easy. I would say that lately my habit has changed to getting news from news websites directly and from newsletters direct from journalists, which is a fun feature of the internet nowadays.
Hazel, I'm not even going to ask you if you get a newspaper delivered to your home, because I know what the answer is. I know, she's shaking her head. Here's how, I want to show folks how Hazel does her thing. Okay, what are we going to do here? This is TikTok. Here's what a TikTok creator does. It's a clip of Hazel explaining the individual economics of carbon taxes while playing her favorite game. Okay? Are we with me here? Sheldon, roll it if you would.
We have a carbon tax, right? And the point of the carbon tax is not for the government to make money. The point of the carbon tax, thank you, is to, prevent people from polluting, of course. And so to avoid this having any unnecessary financial burden on just regular people, instead of keeping the money, it's revenue neutral, which just means, that they split it up evenly and send it back to people's bank accounts. So most people will make money off of Canada's carbon tax. It should be called a dividend. Only the biggest polluters will actually lose out on the money. I think that rather than being directly sent to our bank accounts, it should be handed out via money guns so everybody knows what it's for and can't get mad about the carbon tax, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, back to Zelda.
I got to tell you, you are fantastic. That is a tremendous talent you just demonstrated there. Never mind conveying all that information about the carbon tax, but while playing a video game, you were doing it. That's astonishing. You have 120,000 followers and 3.5 million likes on your TikTok account. So let's figure that out. Who are your followers?
I did check it out, and my followers seem to be generally in the 25 to 32 range. Actually, of course, I get plenty of Gen Zs as well. But for TikTok, anyway, my audience skews a little bit older, which I guess means that more than just Gen Z are on TikTok.
And why do you think they follow you?
I think that I try to combine, I guess you just saw, I think I try to combine facts about economics and climate with humor as much as possible because it can be a very dry topic.
And to confirm, you were not reading that stuff that you were saying to camera, correct?
It took quite a few takes.
Yeah, but still, that's a heck of an achievement. Well done. I was deeply impressed when I saw that.
Thank you.
Now, you and your fellow millennials, I know, like to think of yourselves as up-to-date people, au courant as it comes to the news. How important is that aspect of your generation's view of itself?
Yeah, I think it's fairly important. I think we've all grown up in a time where we've lived through some major events, both in the United States and Canada, as well as the COVID pandemic, which we've all kind of survived through for the last few years. So I think our absorption of news has become almost heightened to a perspective. So yeah, it's very important.
What's the major international event of your life?
I would say it would be COVID-19. I think that's
Really?
the major thing, because it had so many impacts to the way that we live and how much our work transformed. Like, for example, I used to be working in person 5 days a week, commuting downtown Toronto, and now I've been working remotely for the last 3 years. So that's a pretty major impact on my life personally.
What year were you born?
1990.
So you were 11 for 9/11.
Yes, I was.
Which is a fairly impressionable age. And
it is.
So not 9/11 though.
Not 9/11, just because I was younger when that happened. So the direct impacts to me were less, whereas now in my life, the impact that COVID-19 has had, I think, is more palpable on a daily basis for me.
Okay. Paolo, among many things, you are a Marshall McLuhan Scholar. And McLuhan, as we said in the intro, coined that famous phrase, the medium is the message. How do you think that expression applies to what we're talking about here?
Well, to put it simple, the medium is a message means that content is important, but the context makes a difference. And now we live in a different context, and the context shapes the way we perceive reality, the way we perceive the world around us, the way we undertake our current affairs. And so, looking through different generations, media played a different role. And I see this difference. I see myself as raised with the TV like a babysitter, right? Mm-hmm. And TV was a kind of detaching medium because I was in front of the TV, right? My parents yelling, "Oh, you're in front of the TV all the time." Now, well, my students, younger generation, said, "I'm not in front of social media. I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook, on Instagram." That's a huge of a difference.
What does that convey, the difference in that preposition?
Convey that for my generation, media were tools, services, channels to get informed, to get engaged. For this generation, for the younger generation, it's a world they live in.
Here's how you summarize the current relationship among the different generations. You say silence and boomers are the powerful older siblings. Millennials and Gen Z are the energetic but misunderstood younger siblings. And Gen X, the middle child, is often forgotten. Okay, let's pick that apart. Why do millennials and Gen Z feel so misunderstood?
Well, I think all generations feel misunderstood by the others in one way or another. It's just a matter of it's sometimes very hard to take the perspective of someone who is 20 years older or 20 years younger than you. And there's certainly a tradition of older generations trying to understand younger ones. And sometimes they fail and sometimes they succeed. I also think it needs to go both ways. I think there's a tendency for the young generation to dismiss the older generation as irrelevant. Sometimes they might be right, but not always. And I think that perspective taking is best when it goes both ways. That means the older generation has to hold back on criticizing sometimes. It means the younger generation also has to try to take the perspective of the older occasionally.
Given the divide between the older and the younger siblings, which generational values are shaping the future of one of the fundamentals of all of our lives, namely work?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting trends in terms of work attitudes. So I'll focus on Gen Z. So one thing that we see with Gen Z, and it's true of millennials as well, a lot of emphasis on work-life balance. So I don't want to work so much that I don't have things outside of work. Now, some older people see that as low work ethic. It's all a matter of perspective. The other piece is Gen Z is more likely to say that they want a job in which they can be directly helpful to other people. That's gone up in the big survey, say, of 18-year-olds in grade 12. So I think there's some opportunity here with the young adult generation now, with them really wanting to help.
Okay, Jean, let's talk some politics here, because you have suggested that a generation's political profile depends on, for example, how popular the president was during their lifetime. So let's go back. We can go back to the silence where Franklin Roosevelt was the president, and we can come all the way to present day where Gen Z had Donald Trump as the president, and of course, lots of presidents in between. Which generation did best on that front?
Well, I'm not sure it exactly works that way. I mean, what the research suggests is the party and popularity of the president when you're young tends to tilt you either right or left, Democrat or Republican in the US. So millennials, for example, tilt Democrat because Obama was relatively popular, especially, say, compared to Trump or Biden. So with Gen Z, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens because, yep, Trump wasn't popular. Biden isn't particularly popular either. So they've experienced both a Republican and a Democrat president who weren't particularly popular. So where their leanings will go in the long run is a little harder to say.
And that's just some of what we covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, TVO.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.